Hello, everyone. I want to firstly apologize about last week. I was having serious internet issues, and I thought I was going to be able to work around it, but that wasn't going to happen. And I lost complete control, and I had to shut down the show. So we're doing it again. I have some clips prepared to talk about, and I think that we're seeing a really interesting trend from the first night that the committee spoke to what's happening now. So let's talk about it. Hello. So it's been a while now, and probably been in the news. What's exactly been happening with the January 6th committee? And personally, I've been hearing very interesting both talking points and ideas about it. Some people come from the angle of, oh, this is a partisan hack show. This is some the Democrats trying to fuck with Trump, trying to fuck with the Republicans for their agenda with all these rhinos, right? Republicans in name only. And then you have those who go, wow, this is incredible. This is a bombshell. This is just blowing everything out of the water. But I think that currently what we have is what seems to me a committee trying to put things on the record, trying to build precedent, and they're going in a specific direction. This week, the main focus of the committee was specifically about if Trump knew that having Mike Pence not certify the election was criminal. If he knew that there was no way for him to legally stop the certification of President Biden. Last week, what they showed of how even Trump got to this position, what circumstances took place that made him think that the election was rigged. And as we know, the one beforehand was simply kind of like an introduction. So I'm going to give a small retake of my impressions of last week. One of the things that really left the mark on me was testimony about election night with the Trump campaign. What was said that stuck with me was that Rudy Giuliani and other of Trump's close advisors were drunk. Rudy Giuliani specifically was very out of it. And this is kind of where the Dominion hoax machines started happening. The ballots were messed up because you can imagine what's going on. In general, U.S. election for the past 2 decades, there's what's called a red mirage. A red mirage is that Republicans tend to, at the beginning of the polls, look like they're leading, and then there's the blue swing. And that is because Democrats as a whole prefer to vote by mail, by absentee ballot. And this knowledge was shown to be used both proactively and reactively as Trump's strategy to put doubt into the election. What's interesting about this to me specifically is that this has been a trend with Trump, right? You look at like when The Apprentice didn't win the Emmys, it was fraud. When Obama was coming to the White House, it was fraud. When he lost Iowa to Cruz back in 2016, it was mail-in votes and fraud. And once again, when he's losing, it's fraud. So the proactive way was to disincentivize Republicans to vote by mail or to vote by an absentee ballot. Because the idea is that if they don't do that, if you lose the election, you can call some sort of fraud to the mail in and try to get rid of them. The reaction was simply to say, hey, look, where did these ballots come from? It is obviously stolen. And we've heard this, we've lived through this. So let's start going over what's currently going on. And I have clipped here Liz Cheney's opening statements from tonight. So let's listen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me take just a few minutes today to put the topic of our hearing in broader context. In our last hearing, we heard unequivocal testimony that President Trump was told his election fraud allegations were complete nonsense. We heard this from members of the Trump campaign. We heard this from President Trump's campaign lawyers. We heard this from President Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr. We heard this from President Trump's former acting Attorney General, Jeff Rosen. And we heard this from President Trump's former acting Deputy Attorney General, Richard Donahue. We heard from members of President Trump's White House staff as well. Today, we're focusing on President Trump's relentless effort to pressure Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Here again is how the former vice president phrased it in a speech before the Federalist Society, a group of conservative lawyers.
So just remember that Pence had to come out and openly stand against Trump, right? We can't forget that on January 6th, he said Mike Pence couldn't do what was he supposed to do. We have to fight like hell, yada yada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
So here, let's listen to the next clip.
What the president wanted the vice president to do was not just wrong, it was illegal and unconstitutional. We will hear many details in today's hearing, but please consider these 2 points. First, President Trump was told repeatedly that Mike Pence lacked the constitutional and legal authority to do what President Trump was demanding he do. This is testimony from Mark Short, the Vice President's Chief of Staff, who served in the Trump administration in multiple positions over 4 years.
But just to pick up on that, Mr. Short, was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a dear colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the president?
Very consistent.
Okay.
But President Trump plotted with a lawyer named John Eastman to pressure Pence to do so anyway.
Do you guys remember Eastman? The day after January 6th, Eastman, one of Trump's lawyers, asked Meadows to add them to Trump's pardon list. Just remember that. He was asking to get pardoned after the events of January 6th.
As the federal court has explained, quote, based on the evidence, the court finds that it is more likely than not that President Trump and Dr. Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. What exactly did President Trump know? When exactly did President Trump know that it would be illegal for Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes? Here is one sample of testimony given by one of the witnesses before us today, the Vice President's General Counsel.
Did John Eastman ever admit, as far as you know, in front of the president, that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count
I believe he did on the 4th.
You hear that? On the 4th, 2 days, by their own staff, they say, hey, he knew by the 4th that, from what I know, right, the witnesses who came forward have said this. But this clip should answer the question of how would he even get there, right? How did the president get there? Who put this in the president's head? Or is the president just, some sort of legal scholar who just sits and reads constitutional law books?
I would now like to explore how President Trump came to latch on to this ridiculous legal theory that the vice president can select the president of the United States. Mr. Jacob, how did this theory first come to your attention?
The first time that I had a conversation with the vice president about the 12th Amendment and the Electoral
I just want to make sure that the person speaking is former counsel to Mike Pence.
Count Act was in early December, around December 7th. The vice president called me over to his West Wing office and told me that he had been seeing and reading things that suggested that he had a significant role to play on January 6th in announcing the outcome of the election. We concluded that what you have is a sentence in the Constitution that is inartfully drafted. But the vice president's first instinct when he heard this theory was that there was no way that our framers, who abhorred concentrated power, who had broken away from the tyranny of George III, would ever have put one person, particularly not a person who had a direct interest in the outcome because they were on the ticket for the election, in a role to have decisive impact on the outcome of the election. And our review of text, history, and frankly, just common sense all confirmed the vice president's first instinct on that point. There is no justifiable basis to conclude that the vice president has that kind of authority.
Imagine this. The party that holds constitutional originalism, the party that holds the idea that America's foundations are uncorruptible and good, is the same party that is right now not openly speaking against this, defending this. The idea that the vice president can decide over the will of the people. The person we're going to hear from next is J. Michael Ludwig. He's a former federal judge and conservative legal expert who advised Mike Pence during his time as office. Ludwig explained that, in his opinion, the theory that the vice president had any power in overturning the election in Congress would not only be wrong, but he expressed to the vice president, and I believe the president, but I could be wrong about that himself, that this would create a constitutional crisis, rioting in the street, etc.
I believe that had.
By the way, full warning, this guy takes the most massive pauses in his fucking speech, and it's absolutely absurd. So just bear with it.
Vice President Pence obeyed the orders from his president and the President of the United States of America during the joint session of the Congress of the United States on January 6, 2021, and declared Donald Trump the next President of the United States, notwithstanding that.
Like, I want to take this seriously, and there is a lot of serious things to take in this cadence, but every time I hear this, I'm just imagining that scene from Zootopia with the sloth, just slow motion in the background. Like, this guy, some Adderall is necessary, I think.
Then President Trump had lost the Electoral College vote, as well as the popular vote in the 2020 presidential election. That declaration of Donald Trump as the next president would have plunged America into what I believe would have been tantamount to a revolution within a constitutional crisis in America, which in my view, and I'm only one man, would have been the first constitutional crisis since the founding of the Republic.
Yeah, we can't listen to the rest of that. Basically, apparently, Pence's personal lawyer, Richard Cullen, actually contacted Ludwig and asking him to provide a legal argument against Eastman, who, as we heard in the previous clip, was conspiring with Trump for this idea that Pence can overturn the results of the election. Yes, that is absolutely the anti-Novak. We have found him. So he asked Ludwig to specifically put that forward during the negotiations, apparently. And I'll play this last clip. I'll ramble on a bit, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say. I think one of the things I do want to hear is I have a question, first of all. Do you believe the election was stolen or not? I think it's the first thing we have to address if we are talking to each other. And I think the second thing that we need to talk about is, do you think the efforts of this committee would actually have any effect whatsoever? Let's listen to the last clip, and then we'll get into it.
Mr. Eastman was opining that there were two legally viable.
By the way,
Mr.
this is
Eastman was opining. Mr. Eastman.
Sorry about that. This is again former counsel to Mike Pence, Jacob. So just wanted to make that clear.
Mr. Eastman was opining that there were two legally viable arguments as to authorities that the vice president could exercise 2 days later on January 6th. One of them was that he could reject electoral votes outright. The other was that he could use his capacity as presiding officer to suspend the proceedings and declare essentially a 10-day recess during which states that he deemed to be disputed, there was a list of 5 to 7 states that the exact number changed from conversation to conversation, but that the vice president could sort of issue a demand to the state legislatures in those states to re-examine the election and declare who had won each of those states. He said that he did not recommend, upon questioning, he did not recommend what he called the more aggressive option, which was reject outright, because he thought that that would be less politically palatable.
And one last clip, and this is from someone who I think was directly with Trump. I believe it's Eric. I forgot his last name. Eric Hirschman.
It made no sense to me that in all the protections that were built into the Constitution for a president to get elected and steps that had to be taken, that the power to choose the next president would be sitting with the vice president. He described for me what he thought the ambiguity was in the statute, and he was walking through it at that time. And I said,
this is directly with Trump.
Hold on a second, I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the vice president, acting as president of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next president of the United States? And you said yes. And I said, are you out of your effing mind? Right? And that was pretty blunt. I said, you're completely crazy. I said, you're going to turn around and tell 78 plus million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen. And I said, they're not going to tolerate that. I said, you're going to cause riots in the streets. And he said, words to the effect of there's been violence in the history of our country, Eric, to protect the democracy or protect the republic.
Can you imagine that? A sitting president said this, or reportedly said this. He refused, to get interviewed or be a part of this at all. So as much as he's yelling on Truth Modal, he refused to have his day to be heard. And he's not happy with what's coming out. Let's bring Zach in here, or as everyone likes to know him, Zemo, the boy, the man, the myth, the legend.
Hey,
How you
what's
doing,
up,
my
man?
brother?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Just getting off work. Yeah.
Nice.
First off, I want to say, cool show. I like the technology you saw. You're gonna have to show me a few tips how to do that. But
Oh yeah, of
with
course, of course.
yeah, but I've only been listening for 10 minutes. But as you living in the States, I've lived this fiasco. So So, first off, do I think the election was stolen? No, absolutely not. I mean, I've always been open to the evidence. For the record, I did vote for Donald Trump. If I could take it back, I would. It was really a 50-50. I stared at the ballot for like 5 minutes before I voted. It was a true hold your nose moment. But anyways, that notwithstanding, I'll just tell a little story. I was working with my uncle at the time, and my uncle and my aunt, we was on the truck running a route delivery and stuff. So we was all paying attention to the election. They're conservatives, right? And after about the second or third day, I started hearing, they're counting the votes, and he's won, trust me, And about the second or third day, I had seen no real evidence, and I just asked them. I said, "Y'all think he won?" And they're like, "Yeah, absolutely." And I'm like, based off what? And they couldn't really provide any evidence. They sort of gave just silly arguments. And yeah, that's pretty much been every conversation I've ever had about someone who believes it was stolen. Again, I'm open to the evidence, but there's just no evidence to be had. And in fact, plenty of evidence, as you've just shown, pointing the entire opposite direction, right? So
But
people who
isn't the
believe the election was
crazy
stolen,
thing, Zach? Isn't the crazy thing? It's not that it was quote unquote not stolen. There's evidence to show that this was coordinated. These lies, this propaganda was intentional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of shocking elements to it, to be honest. Yeah, that is definitely one of them. Just a statement of, you think a vice president can make the call? Yeah, I do. Are you out of your fucking mind? And then him saying, "Oh, well, there's had to been violence before." Like, that is absolutely ridiculous. Beyond measure. You know what I mean? And it's kind of crazy because we don't even have that rule formally written down. The peaceful transfer of power. I'm sure other rules allude to it, but it's not written in stone. So, because it's just assumed, like it's just in the spirit of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Trump did this very often. He would commit, real felonies, real problems in plain sight. He'd do it all the time.
Now you are more. I live in New York, and the people around me are generally left wing, right? But I do hear some talking points. Is this something that you have heard around in your area where people say something like, "They're both dirty, they're both corrupt"? A type of equivocation when I point out or when I speak about the atrocities that Trump did, right? Like, but the difference is one's in plain sight, right?
Right. And to clarify, you're talking about Trump, right?
Yeah.
The lies are implanted. Like, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's just in
Trump.
plain sight.
Yeah, I mean, throughout his presidency, I mean, it was they documented, 30, I don't know, however many, hundred, like tens of thousands of lives, I think it amounted to. But yeah, he would just lie blatantly. Like he would send a Twitter, like he would tweet something, and then I remember in a debate, he sent a tweet about, I don't know, some woman calling her a pig or something. And then when the moderator said, "So you sent this tweet saying this," and he goes, "Never happened." Just like, that's not even a good lie. But it's so strange because, I mean, Sam Harris has mentioned this. It's not a good lie. Like our lies used to be believable. Like you have to insert a lie into the properly allotted space for it to make sense. But for a flat out just negation of reality, it's just bizarre. Absolutely bizarre and strange. But yeah, as far as this, I'll just say one other thing, and then but as far as this council's going, I don't know theoretically, like what. I don't know if you asked about the outcome or will this make a difference. I
Yeah.
don't
Do you
really know.
think that there's real merit to this, or do you find this to be some sort of political theater?
Well, I wanted to ask first, like, what is the intent? Like, what's the official narrative for why this is happening? Just an investigation into what happened, pure and simple.
So committees historically are tasked with three things: investigating domestic, like state issues, federal issues, and drafting legislation to like fix or these issues. So the committee is assembled within its power to investigate and put on the record something that happened federally that needs to be addressed and can be referred to when representatives are going to draft laws.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
that's the official capacity, at least.
Right. I mean, as far as I think it's effective in the sense that anybody that is at least willing to watch the footage, I mean, even if you grant it's completely one-sided, right? Even if that's a viable argument, which it's not, but we don't have to deal with that. Even if you grant that it's completely one-sided, even the fact that the one-sided evidence is so bad that, like, even if you showed the other side, quote unquote, it's hard to believe that it would even compare anywhere close to this. But as far as the committee, I think it's very good for people to see, for it to be exposed, for it to be available, because we're still learning things. We're hearing new people testify. We're talking about it again, and I think it deserves to be talked about. It's a very important thing to be talked about. And one other thing, and I'll put a stopper in it, but the equivocation between a BLM riot.
Zach, you don't even have to put a stopper in it. I'm just going to invite you in as a talk because I want this to be a discussion. So I'm going to invite you in to speak, and we can just we can take it off if you're willing.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah. So what about BLM? That's what you want to start talking about.
Yeah, I was just saying the equivocation between a BLM riot, right, and a sitting president, basically inciting a riot onto the Capitol over an election he claimed was fraudulent, right? If you can't see the difference between those two, then we need to have a serious talk, right? Yes, the riots were horrible, right? They were not good. They did not help the actual cause of fixing systemic problems in America. But still, there's a huge difference between disgruntled citizens, I don't know, burning up Starbucks, and disgruntled citizens with militia, type people with, God knows who, orchestrating a plotted plan onto the Capitol. Right, there's that equivocation from the sitting president, and with the whole them trying to hang Pence thing. Basically, he said when they said there's guys outside chanting we want to hang Pence, Trump reportedly said, well maybe they're right, maybe maybe they have a
True, he
point.
did say
Maybe he
that.
did, you know,
From
something to
what I
that effect.
know, I was reading an
Mhm.
article earlier today that one of the insiders for the Proud Boys, they have either recordings or I'm not really sure. I don't think they can play them because it hasn't been put into evidence. But
Right.
I think it was Newsweek. In one of their articles has this where the Proud Boys have seemed to say like after the riot, be like, "Oh, if I would have gotten my hands on Nancy Pelosi, I would have definitely killed her." Well, Mike Pence, I'm
Yeah.
so mad I couldn't get him. Right? They literally say this. Now, I think Mike Pence is a low key hero, and the reason I say this is because while the evacuation of the joint session was being done, Mike Pence was supposed to get into this SUV, and he looks at the driver and he goes, "I'm not getting in." They're supposed to flee the scene, and the driver goes, "Why not?" He goes, "Well, because I know that you don't drive for me," insinuating that he was driving for Trump. In that sense, what was happening in the moment was he knew that if he was going to get in the vehicle, he wasn't going to be able to come back to the joint session. So Pence actually stayed downstairs in a basement, in like a bomb basement thing, for 4.5 hours until the Capitol was clear to walk right back upstairs and continue the certification of the election.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that. That's
That was aired, I
again,
think, in the clip, in today's clip. They had like special pictures that they got like, of the event, of the whole thing, documenting it. Very, very interesting thing. Like Mike Pence, I think, deserves much more credit than what he's given for what he did on January 6th.
yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, he was a very quiet vice. I don't know if he was a quiet vice president or if that just Trump was just so loud. You know, even if he did a lot of great things, we wouldn't know about it, right? But you
I
know,
mean, yeah,
he's
I think in
basically
general, the vice president doesn't want to step on the president's toes in many respects. So
right. Yeah,
unless the president platforms them, vice VPs tends to stay quiet.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, he knew what was up. You know, he knew how Trump is. I mean, how many people have been with Trump, and he's fired them because, you know, at the end of the day, all Trump cares about is loyalty. And, you know, it's his sick, sort of twisted, I mean, you know, narcissistic form of loyalty, right? But yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, if Pence would have gone along with this charade, you know, I don't know how much different the situation would be, but it would have definitely made it worse, right?
I mean, did you
I
hear
mean,
what Judge Ludwig said on the stand? Right?
the guy that
Or
you just
did you
played,
miss
well,
the slow mo
um,
sloth boy was
yeah,
honestly
I heard
it
that.
was. I really wanted to play that because as horrible it is to listen to that man, I think he said one of the most important things to say, which was that in his opinion, if Pence would have done what Trump wanted him to do, we would be currently living through a revolution.
hmm
So,
Yeah, no, I heard it, and you know, even though he had this crazy cadence, right? But no, he was saying very, he was saying very important things, and I got the sense that he was one choosing his words carefully, and two, um, you know, trying not to misspeak, right? Because he's a
hmm
judge. Now, you know, still there's still a little bit of explanation for the cadence, but yeah, I completely agree. Um, yeah, he was saying some very important things right there, and yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. It's a you know once the vice president goes along with it, like you said, it brings up constitutional issues. I don't really know the Constitution verbatim or anything, so what does it say? Is that even, I mean, what does the vice president? What is his role, if any, in the election?
in the election, just to certify the vote.
What I'm saying is, did he theoretically have the power to, I guess, put it on pause or what, overturn it, or was he saying he didn't have that power? Period.
No, so let's play this again. Let me play this again. Um,
Yeah, play it one more time.
1 second. I think this is the clip.
Mr. Eastman was opining that there were two legally viable arguments as to authorities that the vice president could exercise 2 days later on January 6th. One of them was that he could reject electoral votes outright. The other was that he could use his capacity as presiding officer to suspend the proceedings and declare essentially a 10-day recess during which states that he deemed to be disputed, there was a list of 5 to 7 states that the exact number changed from conversation to conversation, but that the vice president could sort of issue a demand to the state legislatures in those states to re-examine the election and declare who had won each of those states. He said that he did not recommend, upon questioning, he did not recommend what he called the more aggressive option, which was reject outright, because he thought that that would be less politically palatable.
So that's what the arguments that Eastman was making towards what the vice president could do. Now, if we just, I'll follow that up with Eric, what's his name? Hirschman, who explains the absurdity of this to begin.
It made no sense to me that in all the protections that were built into the Constitution for a president to get elected and steps that had to be taken, that the power to choose the next president would be sitting with the vice president. He described for me what he thought the ambiguity was in the statute, and he was walking through it at that time. And I said, hold on a second, I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the vice president, acting as president of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next president of the United States? And you said yes. And I said, are you out of your effing mind? Right? And that was pretty blunt. I said, you're completely crazy. I said, you're going to turn around and tell 78 plus million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen? And I said, they're not going to tolerate that. I said, you're going to cause riots in the streets. And he said words to the effect of, there's been violence in the history of our country, Eric, to protect the democracy or protect the republic.
That's what was in.
Yeah, so basically he didn't have the authority. It's not provided in the statute. If he would have done it, they were basically looking, I guess, going over the clause, looking for loopholes. What does this word mean? How can we reinterpret this word? I mean, people forget, like, I mean, this is how Trump, this is how this sort of mind virus works. Like, I really think the way Trump thinks and the way the Republicans who are now kowtowing to Trump think is, I know people say, oh, you're demonizing half the country. Well, one, I don't think it's half the country. I think a lot of people are like me who voted for him. I mean, I was putting up with a lot of shit before that. But the economy was good, blah, blah, blah. But that was the fucking line for me. Like, that is the line of you crossed it. You know what I'm saying? No more, I still watch videos of Trump and think he's hilarious because he is objectively fucking hilarious. But he's also a narcissistic con man. Like, people think he's this megalomaniac genius. Like, he's not. He's a schlockmeister, which is someone who just brands their name onto already established products, right? To, I guess, theoretically add more value to the product. And he's a petty con man. Well, he's not petty. I should rephrase that. He's a con man. He's actually really, really good at it. But I mean, again, to this thinking, there is just everybody has had an argument with somebody who thinks like this in these ways, where it's everything is reinterpreted, and I didn't say that, or this means something.
Of course. But at this point,
it's impossible to win.
Yeah. At this point, it's a bit much. So I see more people in the chat. I think the main question, the thing we're discussing ideally is, how do you view the efforts of the January 6th Commission? Do you think it's political hackery? Do you think it's partisan nonsense? And the second one is, do you think there was legitimate fraud in the election? So if anyone wants to answer this question, definitely jump in. I do want to add another thing about the layman. Let's have an analysis of Trump in a real way. I mentioned this earlier, but him getting mad and saying, "Oh, there was fraud in the election, or fraud in the votes, or fraud in the ballots," that's going back decades, right? During The Apprentice, when he wasn't winning an Emmy, right? He cried, "Oh, that's fraud." When Cruz beat him in Ohio, that was fraud and voting ballot lies. Like, this has been something that Trump has been doing for a long time. And to me, it seems like a serious personality flaw. Unbelievable.
Yeah. He called fraud in the election with Hillary that he won.
Yes, he did.
But that went under the radar because he won, but he still did it. So it's not like I mean, that just speaks for itself. But anyways, yeah. Call into Dandan's excellent show. All right, we got Travis
Pangburn's
on.
here. Pangburn's here.
Yep.
Jump into the caller, Zach, because I know you definitely want to. You
All
have opinions and they're worth it. So I want to listen to what you have to say. Let's take the Travis, the Pangburn himself. How you doing, Trav? That is a great update. Yeah. So I'm a little. I'm not. I don't really have solid ground, and I'll tell you why I don't. Many people who have testified and onto a grand jury and have spoken with prosecutors who have wanted to prosecute Trump for many things he did in New York and federally have kind of like stepped back from wanting to even participate in the trial because it's saying it's taking so long, which leads me to believe they don't have the smoking gun they need. And yet, at the same time, the way this case is building, right, the momentum that it has from establishing, right, that how Trump's rhetoric embroiled the mob, how he was preparing and creating, and how this idea of the fake ballots happened, to this, how him and Eastman were conspiring to overthrow the electors. This looks to me like they're building the foundations of almost any legal case to really show intent. And if they can do that, to me, that would be unbelievable. But what I fear actually is that's personally, without any evidence, yeah, I think there was definitely intent. Just
intent,
from
intent to do what exactly?
Have a mob try to like halt the electors because he knew Mike Pence wasn't going to do it.
Oh, okay. That's that's on somewhat shaky ground as far as
it's definitely on shaking ground. But my speculation works like this, and if I'm wrong, so be it. But if I'm right, I'm gonna fucking stick that in everyone's face. That there's many people who, for example, there's evidence to show that some people in the Congress were giving tours to people who ended up participating in the riot the day beforehand. They were taking pictures. There has been circumstantial evidence of different Proud Boy members and people who were like, "Oh, let me speak with Trump. Let him pardon me after the event." And it's like, why would they want to speak to Trump? These circumstantial things are kind of showing me that there has to been some sort of tertiary communication from Trump and his advisors to lower level members of the House, who therefore communicated with these what we call terrorists in a way. So I hope that's where it's heading, and maybe my hopeness and my hopefulness is clouding my ability to really see this, but that's what I think. No problem, no problem. If you, no
Thanks,
problem,
thanks,
Pangburn.
Trav Meister. Fucking Trav Meister, bro.
How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm having a good time on the show. Talking about contemporary politics is always a good time. Some less contentious than I
It's always a
expected. I
terrible
think.
time.
Oh no! Last week's episode, I was having so much Wi-Fi issues, and that's the day that everyone who disagreed with me was on, and I was really hoping, to actually
Oh,
engage with them and make a good show. It is what it is.
that's unfortunate.
We're having an
Yeah.
informative show today. So,
Yes.
what about you, Dave? Do you think the election was stolen?
I don't think. I mean, I don't think that the election was stolen. I don't know what basis I would have to say that. I haven't seen anything that's convinced me that it was stolen. I'm sure there was some fraud somewhere for some reason. It's a huge election, but in terms of some kind of organized effort that succeeded in changing what would otherwise have been the result, I think that probably didn't happen. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about that.
And what about the committee? Do you think that the committee is just performance for theater, just political theater, or is there actual merit and to what they're doing?
Well, I wouldn't want to characterize it in only one way. There's elements of both. I mean, I'm interested. I think it's interesting and worth investigating what the president did or didn't do. So I'm interested in hearing from witnesses who spoke with him. It's interesting to hear about what he said, what he was thinking, getting a clear timeline of events, and if he did anything criminal to investigate that as well. So I'm not going to say it's. I'm sure there's an aspect of political maneuvering to the whole thing. It is a sorry time for Democrats right now, just based on polling and economic data and so on. I'm sure that somebody somewhere is viewing this as some kind of distraction. So I mean, these things are complicated, and there's always elements of political maneuvering, and sometimes there's merit. But I do think there are things that have been said which lead me to say things like there's some political maneuver. There's some framing of what happened that I think is dubious. I think that there's
Like what?
not well. So like Slothman, I don't know what his name was, the guy that talks really slowly. Was
Yes.
just saying the way he put it was kind of I chuckled a little bit when I was listening to it when it sounded not particularly accurate and kind of over dramatized in the following way, right? He said there was something that I kind of laughed at. Oh, something about the had the president of the had the vice president of the United States obeyed the orders of his president and done X, then we'd be living in a revolution or something like that.
Yeah, with the constitutional crisis in America was what he said.
Yeah. But didn't he also say revolution? I thought he said
Yeah. I said that tantamount to a revolution within a constitutional crisis in America. Ideally, I would play it over again, but no one wants to hear that guy talk.
Yeah, no one. Please don't.
I liked him, but I like everybody.
Well,
so
okay, but like this is one of the things that the vice president is an elected official, and he's serving in his constitutional capacity to preside over the Senate. He's not an agent of the administration. He's not a subordinate to the president. And because of that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, had he followed orders? And there's a meaningful connection between the president and those people who have to follow his orders, the people that can order him around, or that he can order around. Right, so if he had suggested to the secretary,
he also
Defense,
wait. The president can't really order around the attorney general, and yet he was trying to order around Rosen, right, and Barr nonstop.
well, he can fire the attorney general.
It doesn't mean that they have to listen to him because they don't, right?
Well, he can say, "Listen to me, or I'll fire you," and then they can say no, and he can fire them, and he can hire somebody else. Well, he can't.
Yeah, because the vice president is an elected official.
Yeah, he can't do that with the vice president. And there's a difference between an elected official acting in a constitutional role that the president has no authority over, and something like an executive in the administration. So the DOJ is supposed to be independent from the administration, but really it is a part of the administration. The president appoints the attorney general, and he can fire the attorney general. And there's the link between a president and somebody who you could actually say the president can give orders to.
Well,
In
what's
practice, if
interesting is
not
that
in
the
letter.
precedent has been that even though the president does, appoint the attorney general or the uh, chair of the FBI, that those two departments stay separate. That
They
has been the
do.
precedent for a long time, right?
No, it is. But there's an important distinction, is all I'm trying to point out.
Okay, I hear you.
Because if
Distinction is
for
one of
example,
force. It's the extinction. The distinction is one of force, right?
it's one of force and also constitutional role. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. She's an elected representative. She is acting in a constitutional role in a way that's independent from the president. The president can't give orders to Nancy Pelosi. He can't. He can yell at her. He can bloviate and tweet mean things at her. But it would not be plausible to suggest that the president was attempting to give an order to Nancy Pelosi. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not
Yeah.
something that
So
can be done.
where are we going on? How do we move forward from? Because I understand what you're saying. And
Well,
I don't disagree with that. How does that lead into the next point?
it's meaningful because without the idea that the president is attempting to give an order to his subordinate, you really can't say things like, I mean, it makes a legal difference because when it comes down to, if that's where it goes, and it seems to me that that is where it goes, then what this comes down to is the president is acting like a buffoon and he's pursuing a incredibly implausible, but to be fair, pre-existing legal theory in conjunction with one of his attorneys who was trying to sell it to him and help, appease him. And what he was suggesting
and that's many of the stuff that we heard last week in the committee, right? Where they were saying how during the night of the election, the yes men around him, from Giuliani to Eastman, Giuliani, who was reportedly drunk, by the way, was like, oh, they're dumping, right? They're this, right? They're selling this to him, and now it's in his head. So
I'm sure they didn't play any constructive role that evening. But without the link between the president and what he can actually, because if the president has no agency to order Mike Pence around, then this just comes down to the president advocating for a very implausible but existing legal theory. It's not like
but see, that's the thing. It's not. It's not about. This is the thing. It's not. There's no existing theory here, right?
That was
second.
Pre-existing. It's been discussed before in constitutional law. That's why his attorneys were able to present the idea to him, because it had been discussed before. And it's ridiculous and it's implausible. And the idea.
Ludwig rebuffed the idea, right? So this is I don't have a clip of this, but Ludwig, the sloth man, rebuffed the idea that there has been any historical precedent for vice president rejecting electoral votes, calling that theory the root of what he has called a blueprint to overturn the election. This theory is not something in constitutional law. It's not something that's even discussed because it goes against the foundation, the idea that a country founded on the idea that one man has no right to choose elections is even possible to overturn it. It wasn't even considered in the language as a thing to even assume it.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I think it's correct to say that it's never been seriously, there's no precedent for it. It's never been seriously considered by anybody. It would be absolutely absurd. I mean, the idea that even if it were a valid theory, I think to pursue it would be utter folly. It would be better if there was fraud and he lost than if he was right and pursued this legal theory. I think it would be less destructive in the long term. But that said, it has been discussed. You can see this theory in the constitutional law. I remember because we were discussing it actually.
Dave,
because I was actually.
can I throw you?
So let me play this clip. I think this would help clarify where I think we disagree. And I'm using the words of what's his name, Jacobs, who just spoke today on the hearing.
I would now like to explore how President Trump came to latch on to this ridiculous legal theory that the Vice President can select the President of the United States. Mr. Jacob, how did this theory first come to your attention?
The first time that I had a conversation with the Vice President about the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act was in early December, around December 7th. The Vice President called me over to his West Wing office and told me that he had been seeing and reading things that suggested that he had a significant role to play on January 6th in announcing the outcome of the election. We concluded that what you have is a sentence in the Constitution that is inartfully drafted. But the Vice President's first instinct when he heard this theory was that there was no way that our framers, who abhorred concentrated power, who had broken away from the tyranny of George III, would ever have put one person, particularly not a person who had a direct interest in the outcome because they were on the ticket for the election, in a role to have decisive impact on the outcome of the election. And our review of text, history, and frankly, just common sense all confirmed the Vice President's first instinct on that point. There is no justifiable basis to conclude that the Vice President has that kind of authority.
So that sounds kind of, I mean, he sounded like he contradicted himself, because at the beginning of his speech, he said he was, the first time he discussed it with Pence, Pence had called him in. And what he said was Pence had been reviewing materials and reading things that seemed to suggest that he had a serious role to play. And then what he said was, after we talked about it, we reviewed the history, we concluded, and they had made some conclusions, like most people, that it was implausible given everything else. But what I'm saying is what he said at the beginning, that there is an existing idea that the role of the Vice President in certifying
He didn't say it was
the election-
consistent. He said there was, if anything, a tenuously worded statement.
Well, I think what
no,
he said was the Vice President had been reviewing materials that suggested that he had a significant role to play. And my point is that there,
but that's
there
going to say
exists
that
materials.
things were being pushed onto his desk by Eastman or by President Trump himself.
But it's not just hey, look, you're supposed to count. There's this idea existed already in constitutional law. The question is whether or not the inclusion of the word count and certify was supposed to mean some kind of active role. Otherwise, why wouldn't it just say, he counts the votes? It says something like, it's escaping me exactly how this goes, but it says something like, he is to open them, he is to count and certify. And that kind of sounds like he's supposed to be doing something that isn't just kind of tallying them up. Otherwise, it's kind of bizarre to write a whole sentence about the different things he's supposed to do. And this idea had existed. It's not been seriously considered, because it does seem, when you think about how easy it would be to abuse a provision like that, it just seems like an insane idea. And I agree, it's an insane idea. But the president didn't just come up with this on his own. And I remember discussing this in constitutional law because I was in constitutional law class during this time. And we took a detour from the normal curriculum to read the old case law on this subject and discuss whether or not the inclusion of that terminology meant anything significant. For the president didn't just come up. My point is my only point is that he didn't come up with this legal theory on his own. It's a long shot legal theory that existed, and he was
we know that Eastman,
without any agency to control
pushed the theory. We know that Eastman pushed the theory onto Trump.
Well, I'm sure he said, what can be done here, and Eastman, recalled this ridiculous long shot idea and presented it to him, and that's probably something like what happened. But what I'm saying is that
what happened was
between Trump and Pence, he has no agency through Pence. He's just spouting off about silly legal philosophy, and that's not a criminal act. That's just somebody being stupid, not understanding legal. Not really understanding how implausible it would be to.
Would you like it to be a legal thing if the president tries? to overturn an election that should be just not allowed?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
If you could draft a law that the president, whether intended or not, is supporting a bid to overturn an election, that's illegal. Presidents can't do that. That's outside the scope of the. Would you be okay with that or not?
Yeah, I'd be okay with that. I think I'd be okay with that. I think so. The problem is that there's some right now. There's some kind of anytime the interests of the government are in question, the DOJ, which tends to prosecute the case, and the DOJ is supposed to be independent from the executive, but is not actually independent from the executive, and so somebody would have to, if there were actually, imagine there was actually a credible case of possible election fraud in a state. Somebody would have to make that argument. It would have to come from somewhere. So
Exactly.
if it's not coming from the DOJ, it's going to have to come from elsewhere. And I'm just pointing out that I'm not sure what that elsewhere would be at this time, which would be the practical problem with implementing a piece of legislation like that.
I don't see why.
Well,
Why can't the states talk about it? Other states talk about it. Other sitting Congress people, just not the people. It's not the guy directly involved with whether the outcome is going to affect their own power and stature.
Well, who's going to conduct
Yeah,
the
that's
investigation?
what I would say. Real quick, I would go along with something like, anybody that directly. I don't know how you would make this direct distinction, but
On the ballot of the
anybody.
election.
Okay, so just Pence and Trump and everybody else can talk about it besides them, sort of
And
thing?
Biden, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah, and it goes the other way,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, it does raise the question, obviously, as Dave talks about, what if there is a credible, actual election fraud or whatever, or something suspicious, how would we address that? Now, that's a good question to think about. I agree. And as far as Trump with the legal theory, again, like you said, there has to be some recourse. And for me, it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that the vice president would play some role in a unless there's the clause that's written, which there isn't, to my knowledge, that he can't participate in it. He would have some role in it, presiding over the Senate. It just sort of seems.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of from what I know, a lot of presiding positions is simply like a ceremonial one. Like, oh, you count the votes, you certify them, it goes to the House. Like, check, done. Like,
right. But with that, that being said, real quick, even if that theory is out there, it has to be implemented. The process of actually looking at an election and the problems in it. That process has to be based on some type of evidence, right? And again, whether he actually knew this theory was bogus or was playing dumb or is really dumb, who knows? I have a hard time believing Trump legitimately didn't understand that this was some sort of a problem. But
I mean, we do have Hirschman's testimony. Should I play it again about him speaking? I think with Eastman and what the response was. So let's play that just so we can really clearly see what the response to his objections were. Sorry, click the wrong thing.
Mr. Eastman was opining that there were two legally viable.
My mistake, wrong clip.
It made no sense to me that in all the protections that were built into the Constitution for a president to get elected and steps that had to be taken, that the power to choose the next president would be sitting with the vice president. He described for me what he thought the ambiguity was in the statute, and he was walking through it at that time. And I said, hold on a second, I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the vice president, acting as president of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next president of the United States? And you said yes. And I said, are you out of your effing mind? Right? And that was pretty blunt. I said, you're completely crazy. I said, you're going to turn around and tell 78+ million people in this country that you're theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen. And I said, they're not going to tolerate that. He said, you're going to cause riots in the streets. And he said, words to the effect of there's been violence in the history of our country, Eric, to protect the democracy or protect the republic.
So, in many respects, I think that they knew what the effect of this was going to be. They knew.
What do you think that shows? Because I don't think it shows anything legally relevant as to the president's legal liability. It just shows a couple of dullards that don't understand legal philosophy talking about legal philosophy, and then trying to talk about it in a way that would be influential, but with that. Again, they don't have any agency. They don't have any direct ability to influence this process. They're just spouting off with bad.
No, we're talking. This was a conversation between Hirschman and Eastman, who specifically worked with Trump on this idea, who was advising him about it. So this is not a dullard. Okay. These are lawyers. These are lawyers who are advising the president.
Sure.
Saying, yeah, sure. We'll have tons of rioting in the streets, right? War for them, right? Knowing, as it was established, that the election fraud was fake. Like they knew it was fake. They knew it wasn't real.
I think that I don't think that that's an accurate characterization. It sounded like he told him about this long shot legal theory, which again I still want to make clear it was not a novel construction. It's something that has been discussed. The reason I know
whether it's novel or not, but whether it's novel or not a novel idea, there's never been precedence to even attempt it. It's just so out of the realm. It's like looking at words, almost like Bible scholars who look at like a few words and go, well, technically, if you really think about it, right? It's like one of these things where
that's
I think
right.
It is. Why not?
Because in that case, you're trying to, there's no pre-existing. It's kind of like the people who it's more like the people who think that they can hold snakes and drink poison, right? The kinds of it's something that people think they can do because of something that was said in the Bible that almost everybody else in Christendom agrees is nonsense and metaphorical. Obviously, you're not supposed to dance with rattlesnakes.
Yeah, so it's not.
But it does say
whether it's novel or not, are you actually arguing that the Constitution says that it makes sense through the constitutional language that the vice president can stop the certification of an election?
I'm saying that I don't think that that's the correct interpretation of that clause. But there has been discussion in constitutional law that is the correct interpretation of that clause, and it's not a crime to pursue that theory in court ever. It's never a crime to pursue a legal theory in court. It's not even. Well, I think it's morally dubious if you're the president of the United States. I do think it's morally wrong, but it's not in any way. It doesn't establish any kind of legal liability. It's kind of irrelevant from a.
Yeah, but we're not just talking. We're not just talking about legal liabilities, right? We're talking about culpability. We're talking about the events that led to January 6th, to a riot on the Capitol.
Yeah,
and
but
this
what you'd asked me
bogus
was
nonsense.
which parts I thought were meritorious and which parts I thought were kind of superfluous and irrelevant. And I think.
But you think this is the meritorious part?
Well, I don't think that. I think meritorious in the sense that I agree that this was a boneheaded legal theory to pursue because you have to think about the bigger picture here and not just whether you can pursue the legal theory. But that is almost, I don't really understand what the point, I mean, unless you're going to charge him with a crime, he's no longer in office. He's honestly kind of irrelevant right now, unless he comes back and
Trump is not irrelevant. How could you say that Trump is irrelevant?
Well, he's not currently he's just kind of a private citizen living in his golf club and banned off of Twitter right now. He's not really executing any agenda in the United States government.
He's meeting. One second, he's doing rallies. He's meeting with different politicians. He's endorsing politicians. He gets donations and spread those donations and fund politicians throughout the nation. He's a very relevant political figure.
Okay, sure, he's a relevant political figure, but he's not in the government. And if you're in Congress and you're on a committee and you're not investigating a governmental figure for an indictable crime or a culpable act of immorality for which you could then remove him from office, what exactly is the purpose here? Because
So
I'm interested in to the extent they can identify people who need to pay the price of justice. So that's anybody that perpetrated the
well,
terrorist acts.
committees are definitely not there for judicial purposes, right? They're not there to argue the evidence, present the evidence in any type of legal culpability. What they are there to do is to investigate federal and international, federal, domestic issues, right? That go on the record as therefore a record-driven body from which legislators can draw laws or from the DOJ can therefore try to start investigating. But that's not what their aim is, right? Committees don't do that. It seems like they're
Sure.
building in that direction because they're specifically worried about the events specifically of January 6th, right? The march onto the Capitol, the break-in. Right? That's what they're specifically trying to build. Their question is, why did this happen? How did this happen? And how come we didn't see it happening? Right? That's kind of the questions that they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, but you can understand why you can understand why some people might be skeptical that there's no political grandstanding or distracting going on here, because it does kind of seem like it's a lot less, we know what happened, right? Okay, how it happened. It's a mob breaking into the Capitol. I mean, you might be interested in some government communications if there was something in the government going on that, for example, if Trump actually kind of like ordered, imagine he like ordered this somehow, I don't know, or he ordered the National Guard specifically to stand down or something, or
I mean, he
I don't
didn't
know
call.
what it would
He
be.
refused to send the National Guard for over 2 hours. That's also true,
That
right?
is
That is
true.
the thing.
And that's something that I could see would be a legitimate subject of inquiry for impeachment, because while he doesn't have to do anything, it does kind of seem like it behooved
I
him to
mean,
send in the National Guard.
so I think that when we look at this and why it seems political to begin with, is when the committee was drafted, Republicans refused to support it, right? To have it completely bipartisan. So when the select committee from the majority was formed, which is this one, there are 2 sitting Republicans. There were Liz Cheney, who was ousted from the leadership for standing up against Trump. So I think the politics around January 6th are not necessarily from the like affirmative direction, one where like energy is being put into it to make it political by the current majority party, but rather it's political because of the minorities party to even refuse to be a part of it.
Well, be that as it may, I do see why some people kind of roll their eyes when somebody like Slothman comes on to the Senate committee and starts talking about how President Trump was giving orders to Mike Pence, which doesn't make any sense. And
No,
then
he didn't
talks
say that.
about,
He said that if he would have followed orders, if he would have taken if he
I
would
think
have
he said if he would have obeyed the orders of his president,
no,
there's no such thing.
the specific quote was the declaration of Donald Trump as the next president would have plunged America into what I believe would have been a tenuous to a revolution within a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, but before that, the antecedent was if he phrased it as if President,
Yeah,
if God damn it,
yeah,
if
but
Mike Pence had followed orders. That's not even
but
the
let's
coherent concept.
why is that
Mike Pence doesn't,
incoherent?
because Mike Pence, it's misleading, is what it is. Because Mike Pence doesn't receive orders, and if he was someone who had, imagine, there's a big difference between someone who receives orders and someone who doesn't receive orders. Because the person who
Yeah,
receives
but you
orders is a
understand.
legal agent.
I think you're being too pedantic.
What
I
I'm
think
doing
you
is
are.
I'm highlighting why some people roll their eyes at this. That's what I'm trying to explain, why it seems silly, because obviously the vice president doesn't take orders from the president of the United States
Yeah,
when he's serving his constitutional
good
role. It's as
good thing he.
ridiculous as saying if Pelosi had followed Trump's orders. It's just like it's not
Yeah,
even a cogent.
can you imagine that like you don't have real legal leverage over me, but I'm following your orders. would that actually be a absurd thing to think? Because technically, I don't take orders from you from like a logistical analysis. I think this is to me like harping on words and giving specific words such weight as to roll your eyes like, oh, like Trump, like Pence could even take orders from Trump. Technically, he doesn't even take orders from him. It's not like he's beholden to him.
Well, I think you're ignoring the bigger narrative that they're painting, which is that, I mean, let me set up juxtapose two opposing narratives, right? One in which the president of the United States is coming up with novel, ridiculous readings of the Constitution, and then giving orders to people and threatening his subordinates if they don't overturn the election. And then his subordinates, like the Attorney General and the Secretary of Defense, like defy the president of the United States in an act of
which they did, and they
save
quit.
the democracy.
I mean, Barr quit because of that, right?
I don't know. I don't know, but
no, Barr literally quit. He literally quit because he testified last week or earlier this week that he literally quit because of the things Trump was asking him to do.
Okay, but what I'm saying is,
and it's not that Trump came up with the novel, right? That's also not the narrative. It's not that Trump came up with the novel idea. Rather, Eastman, his lawyer, with other lawyers like Giuliani, came up and were pushing these narratives at him.
No, they didn't come up with it. That's what I'm saying is false.
No, they came up to him with it. Like come up like from it. Yes, they came up to him with it. Honestly, whether or not whether I'm not going to argue whether or not the idea is novel. It's very simple. It's ridiculous. Has zero precedent, and there's no reason for anyone in that position to bring that up other than to either try to brown nose and bootlick the president or to usurp power for oneself.
Well, that's also false, right? If you're the president's, well, because if you're someone's attorney and they ask you to come up with resources within the law in order for them to achieve their aims, it is your job as an attorney to come up with every viable argument you can think of to present to a court. So it's not just the only reason is to kiss Trump's ass. No, that's actually.
Wait, so do you think that a good lawyer should advise a racist bigot how he can legally discriminate against people in the country because that's what a good lawyer does?
What?
No, you're saying that.
Say that again?
A good lawyer, you said, advises to whatever capacity to give the best thing to his client, even if that thing is to overthrow an election, to usurp power undemocratically. Imagine, would a good lawyer be the type of lawyer who legally helps his clients on the border discriminate against ethnic minorities, or on the border fraud the government technically legally? Is that what you think a good lawyer does?
What I'm saying is that in an adversarial system, that is what a lawyer is supposed to do. We expect attorneys to be zealous, unwavering advocates for their clients' needs, whatever that is.
I don't. I expect lawyers to be knowledgeable about the law and also be a person who can exercise judgment. Because many other lawyers said no. So what?
I'll tell you why. So what? This is a counterexample to your claim a second ago that the only reason to present this legal theory to the president is to kiss his ass. That's clearly not true.
I mean, but there's other voices in the room, right? As we have seen from the committee hearings this week and the week before, who have openly said, yeah, we told them this is crazy. This is not a thing. You can't do this. The election wasn't stolen. None of this can happen. Like the election wasn't stolen. Trump knew that. The Eastman knew that. So he's just doing. So
it was. I think he's actually thinks he got.
No, Trump was told plenty of times. So it's either he's deranged, or he's literally a psycho. But Eastman is either deranged, or Eastman is clearly deranged, or a psycho, because these two options of I'm going to, if someone tells me, well, I'm just advising him to the best of my capabilities as his lawyer, even if the thing I'm advising him and I'm helping him set up, is this legally tenuous kind of thing that's not novel but doesn't have any precedent and will send the country into riots, right? And usurp a democratic election, and you tell me that's not a psycho thing to do? That's a psycho thing to do. That's not a counter argument. That's agreeing with that's a horrible psycho thing to do.
I don't. So I don't think that it would. I don't think there would actually have been a civil war. But I think that reason for an attorney to come up with these arguments that just really kind of, I mean, it's fine. Like, I don't want to be, the kind of dick that's like been to law school and understands how this works. But actually, when there's a legal dispute in the federal government between branches and so on about constitutional issues, you're supposed to, as a constitutional attorney, look for constitutional theories that advance your client's interest. If your client thinks the election was stolen, then as an attorney, you're supposed. Now, maybe you also, as a human being, have some thoughts that this guy's out of his mind and he's going to send the country into civil war. And, that's perfectly viable. I certainly wouldn't chastise somebody for quitting on President Trump in this moment. But when you say,
would you
things
chastise someone supporting him?
I probably would. But when you say things like, Eastman is clearly a psycho or a brown noser, and that's the only reason that he should be giving Trump this legal advice, that strikes me as indicative of your ignorance of what lawyers do. Yeah,
No,
actually,
I
that's
don't. I think
exactly what lawyers
a
are supposed to
psycho,
do.
any lawyer who does what you say, give people advice in a way that is clearly psychotic. But it's not like, we're talking about a minor tax loophole or how am I going to get away with a speeding ticket. We're talking about someone who is sitting in the White House, in the Oval Office, giving advice to the President of the United States.
As his lawyer.
And who cares if that's as his lawyer? Do lawyers not have ethical obligations either?
Well, he has ethical obligations to the judiciary system, the legal system, and the court. He has really the lawyer's competing interests are his obligations to his client's interests, but also as an officer of the court. And that means making sure that you don't undermine the process of legal proceedings. But there's nothing about suing in federal court and saying, because this is what Trump tried to do. He tried to get the court to rule that Mike Pence did actually have this ability that he thought that
No,
he wanted.
he wasn't trying to get a court to rule. He was trying to have Mike Pence just do it. No, the evidence showed that he just
there was. I think there actually was. I believe I actually read the case. There was a filing submitted in federal court, which was a motion to have the court rule on this constitutional issue as to whether or not, because he wanted it to be. Trump wanted it to be clear, I guess, that Mike Pence could do this. And he wanted that to be.
I mean, but he literally tweeted the day of the riot. Pence wasn't willing to do what he could have done to save this country. Go fight like hell for it. Right? Like, he didn't care whether it was legal or not. That wasn't. Right? He was just looking for anything to hold on to power. And Eastman aided him. And Eastman, the day after January 6th, on record, there's record of this, called Mark Meadows, the chief of staff of Donald Trump, and was asked to put onto the pardon list. Right? So it's hard for me to take that into consideration with the fact that, he was just being a good lawyer. And if that's what a good lawyer means to be, then law as a whole is the most disgusting, unethical thing ever. If that's what we have to concede is a good lawyer. I think a lawyer's obligation is much more than just to his client and to stay within the law. I think that's a bit much.
Yeah, but you are kind of overlooking there's a whole discussion about how an adversarial system works and to what extent you should fight for your client. Is it to the full extent? Is there a line that you shouldn't cross? The old adage is, what if you're defending Jeffrey Dahmer and you have the option to, reduce his sentence and get him out of prison? Because the idea is in an adversarial legal system, somebody has to argue on Jeffrey Dahmer's behalf to get him out of prison. Everybody has to have a lawyer here, no matter.
I think me and Dan both agree with that point, right, Dan?
Yeah, of course.
Of course,
yeah.
Right.
But we're not talking about
this line that there's no reason for anybody to help Donald Trump figure out what the legal constitutional options he has are. And that I think is clearly wrong.
No, it's to support him in a preposterous legal avenue, and to not back off and be like, this is just like an idea I had. You can't be taking this seriously. This is not going to pan out in court. There's really no grounding for this. There's zero precedent for this. You can't do that. That's not what was happening. While all of the other advisors were telling him, don't do this,
Yeah.
Eastman kept going.
Yeah,
Going all the way till the end that he asked for a pardon.
Yeah, so your lawyer, like, I understand if you have a grievance, but like, if what you're saying you're going to do to your lawyer or the conversations you're having is something the lawyer thinks is illegal, or unconstitutional, like, what if the lawyer, I don't really even understand why the lawyer thing is super important. I mean, Trump made his own decisions, right? He's a grown man. He enacted many executive orders. He spoke in many debates. I mean, Trump is many things, but let's not pretend he's totally ignorant. Like, even if the lawyer, and yeah, he's entitled to his defense, right? But he knew what he was. He had to have some clue. He had to have some clue, right? And yeah, is the lawyer obligated to assist their client in something that is like unconstitutional? I mean, that's a real question. I don't know the answer to that. I would hope not. And also, the lawyer, it seems to me, would have an obligation, as Dandan just said. This is no grounding. This is going to make you look like a buffoon, and this is going to actually hurt you. Like, this is gonna make your life way worse. You're going to look like an idiot. There's going to be litigations, and there's going to be a fucking committee dissecting every second of your idiotic little game that you're playing, right? So it seems to me, if I were a lawyer, I would advise him, this isn't going to work out. And again, put that point to the side. We can charge Donald Trump at the very least. It's gross neglect. Let's go to that day. When I first saw the ride on television, I was like, oh, a few people around the edge on the little balcony looking thing. And then as I saw more footage, I realized, oh, they're breaking inside. Oh shit, they're going in, they're going into the chambers. And I think to view the psychology of that crowd, right, is sort of like a spear and an arrow shaft, right? There was like 10, I'll just throw gross numbers out there to make my point. There's like, I would say 10 to 20% legitimate, violent, bad actors, right? Just Proud Boys, Prayer. I forget all the names of them.
Patriot Boys, Patriot Front,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Patriot Front, Storm Front, whatever their names are, Stormtroopers, Star Treks, whatever. And so they were the tip of the spear. And then there was maybe a 40% of rabid supporters, but not necessarily committed to some violence. They might they might break a few windows. They might push a few cops. And then there was another 40 that was just sort of these old people just along for the ride and sort of, was far away from the action, didn't know what happened. But that very day, I remember Chris Christie getting on TV and they said, have you talked to Donald Trump? He said, I've tried to call him 3 or 4 times. Everybody I know tries to call him. He didn't answer his phone. He's not responding to nobody, And then when he finally did get on TV, he said, you all go home. You've all done something very special, right? Never forget it. You've all done something very special today. Now, if that is not proof of at least, at the very bare minimum, total neglect and total disregard for the country you live in and the lives of the police officers that were protecting the Capitol, et cetera, and your supporters for that matter who got thrown in jail for their efforts, right? I mean, just the whole thing is awful, and I just don't see how you can argue some ignorance on the fact. Like he had to know something about that was deeply wrong. That's all I got to say.
I think that's right. I mean, I agree with most of that, actually. Apart from the bit at the beginning where you said, should a lawyer go so far as to advise his client of something that is unconstitutional? The question, what he would have said is, we can raise this constitutional issue, which hasn't been explicitly ruled on before, but has been discussed in the literature. But it's probably a long shot. Anytime you're raising a constitutional issue before the court, The court's going to decide what's constitutional, and it's the attorney's job to argue on behalf of what's advantageous to his client. And the court's job is to decide what's constitutional. If you're an
But
attorney, your job absolutely
Eastman,
is to argue for what your client, what his
but
interests are,
Eastman
regardless of constitutionality.
didn't just bring it. You think that it's okay? You think Eastman didn't just bring it up to him? He continued pushing that forward with him,
What do
right?
you mean?
It's like, so Eastman didn't just say, "Hey, there's this thing." Like, it's not a thing. And John, that's what I want to do. You think that you think it's a good? So let me make it. Do you think it's a good thing for a lawyer when he brings up some like random little speculation? If the client goes, "That's what I want to do," the lawyer has to sit behind that 100%.
Well, the lawyer works for the client, and he can't do something the client orders him not to do. What he can do is he can say, "I don't think this is a good idea. It's a long shot at best, and it will probably make you look like an idiot in the media and afterward, and we might be risking some blowback from investigation in Congress or something along those lines."
And then he goes,
But
"I don't care. I want to do it." Do you think a good lawyer would be like, "I'm not doing this. Find a new lawyer," or a good
do you
lawyer would say, "Yeah,
understand
let's go ahead and do it.
what does "do it" mean? Because "do it"
Let's
in
go
this
ahead and
case,
fight this. Talk to Pence. Let's figure out how to make this happen."
well, again, talking to Pence is something that you don't need a lawyer to do. Like, you can say, tell Pence this. That's not that's really not what the lawyer would do. Is the lawyer would do what they did, if I remember correctly, was file this brief in federal court to try to get an advantageous ruling that this was within the purview of the vice president in his role in certifying the election, to get a ruling on this issue which didn't really have a ruling before. That's what the lawyer would do in this case, and I believe that's
Yeah, but the
actually what they're
lawyer
trying
did
to
more
do.
than that, right? So like, I don't have all the clips there, but if you watch the committee, Eastman did a lot more than just that. Eastman supported, perpetuated, talked, went, tried to convince Mike Pence's lawyers to jump on top of it. This is where we have the literal clip of Hirschman speaking to Eastman, going, "Are you serious? You want Mike Pence to do this? Like, you know what's going to happen if we do this?" He goes, "Well, yeah, democracy, violence exists for democracy." He said this in the open. He asked for a pardon after January 6th. I think that
I'm sure
clearly
he did.
shows
Who
that
wouldn't?
clearly shows that. So it goes back, Mike. I think Eastman is either a psycho or a bootlicker.
Yeah, and that, I think, is and please don't take offense when I say that, but it is kind of a juvenile way of viewing how this legal interaction between a client and his attorney would work.
I think that you're unwilling to see this as more than just a client lawyer interaction, and you're
No,
missing the
I can see
context.
I can see it as many things. It could be bootlicking, and it could also be just somebody who wants to, I don't know, cause a bunch of violence, or it could be someone trying to serve the interest of his client within the adversarial framework of the Constitution
But
and
that's
so
not
on. And
But
it's
it's
not
not just
fair
what
to
happened.
just say it's either bootlicking or it's
But
whatever
that's
and
not what
ignore.
happened.
Well,
You're
that is what
ignoring.
happened.
No, you're ignoring the fact that Eastman went to meet with Pence's lawyer to
That
be like, "Hey, have him stop the electors on this and this day," and they're
meeting
like,
with
"No, that's
another
insane."
attorney is not a criminal act. It's really not even an irresponsible act to have conversations with other attorneys and try to get them to see your legal point of view. There's nothing there that is indicative of bootlicking or whatever other category, and not an attorney advocating for his client by talking to other attorneys and going through the process and filing the brief like they did and doing everything he can to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're
Yeah,
only willing to see this.
I will never, ever, 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 ever stand behind legality as a substitute for morality, ever.
Well, of course not, but it
But that's
can
what you're
be
doing.
when. No, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is that what I was going to say is that when you're talking about how a lawyer should interact with a client who may be wrong, but nonetheless has the right to a lawyer who will advocate for his interests, exclusively for his interests, because that's the system that we have set up. Then you have to consider that the lawyer may have to do things for his client that he might think are a bad idea in the big picture, But there is an argument to be made that within the system that we've set up, that's what the lawyer is supposed to do.
Yeah,
You
within
have
the
to set up-
system, the lawyer can advocate for a position which he knows is going to harm thousands of people. That to
No,
me
no,
is that's still morally bankrupt.
No. Within the system, lawyers must. That is the way that we've set it
Must?
up. You must.
I have to.
advocate for your
If
client.
I have to as a lawyer, I must advocate for my client's position.
You don't have to, but it is something.
But
that
Eastman
is-
did.
It is something that is not so clearly morally objectionable when you have a system that is designed to operate that way.
So
Because
then
we
again,
don't
how
have
are
a
you
legal
not
system.
hiding behind the system and the laws as a way to talk about morality, as a way to talk about being right, not being a quote unquote psycho?
You're
Or
confusing the argument from legality as a substitute for morality with a nuanced discussion of what is what is ethical for attorneys to do within the context of an adversarial system where they're designed to set up.
I'm talking about what is ethical for a person to do. And when I
This
talk
person
about
also happens to be an attorney, and that's important.
So what is he first, an attorney or a person?
I don't even know what that means, quite frankly. His
So
job, his actions with respect to President Trump were the actions of an attorney. And if you're going to evaluate his ethics and his diligence in his job and his interaction with his client in a legal setting, which is what this conversation has to be about, then you have to analyze his actions as an attorney. You can't just ignore that and just castigate it as bootlicking. It's a juvenile way to look at this issue.
Well, this
So
is
you
why
keep
earlier
saying
I asked this real
one
quick.
second.
I'm sorry.
You keep saying that I'm being juvenile about it. I'm not being juvenile at all. When I use terms like bootlicking or psycho, obviously I'm speaking very broad. But if you want to get really nuanced, I can only see the reason why I can only see it from a person perspective, right? Oh, I'm a lawyer. I can hide behind this legal jargon. I'm acting within my capacity as a lawyer. I'm not acting within my capacity as a person. These are not my opinion. I'm serving a client. Whether or not you're serving a client, you have the legal right to do so, and even the legal protections to do so. That doesn't mean that your actions are not psychotic, as in harming other people, disregard to other people's life, or your actions are in one where you try to carry favor with the most powerful man in office, because power, is very attractive. And when I call him a bootlicker, I'm talking about the latter. And when I call him a psycho, I'm talking about the former. And you can hide behind legal protections, the job of a lawyer within an adversarial position. That is hiding the person behind the title.
But you're just ignoring how the legal system works and pretending as though it's just your friend, and is it your job to just advocate for your friend no matter what? Obviously not. If your friend's a murderer, it's your ethical duty to turn him in. But if you're an attorney as a murderer, it's your ethical duty to try and make sure that he gets the best possible defense. It's not the same relationship. It's a special relationship between
we're talking
two people.
about the Dave.
We're
talking about the capacity of a lawyer to help someone get away with murder.
No. You're suggesting that he should not have provided Trump with these constitutional options and pursued them.
He should have not helped them. Yeah, 100%.
And further, actually, that's fine. I don't actually have necessarily so much of a problem with that particular claim. I probably wouldn't have either. But then you're also saying that the only reason for him to do so is because he's a bootlicker or a psychopath. And that
100%.
is, and that's the part which is obviously ridiculous. I mean,
Why is that ridiculous?
Well, I've been trying to explain it, Dean. You have to completely ignore the nuanced ethical issues that come up in an adversarial legal system that we have set up. And the classic example is you have to defend Jeffrey Dahmer. You know that he committed the murders.
No, this is a different thing. Again, you keep going back to if I'm a defense lawyer and I have to represent Jeffrey Dahmer in court, right? Personally, I'm not going to do that, but our legal system is set up in such a way where defense lawyers are necessary. People want to get their hands dirty. I'm not going to, morally, I find it reprehensible. But we're talking about Eastman. We're not talking about defending someone who has committed murder. We're talking about helping someone draft a legal strategy to commit murder.
No, that's not what we're talking about. You can't
Yes, it
help your
is.
client commit a crime. You can help your client argue for a constitutional position, right? That you absolutely can do. He didn't try and help Trump organize a riot, or if he did, he obviously should go to jail for that. He didn't try to help Trump organize an armed invasion of the Capitol. What he did was he
Well, we don't know
suggested,
that. We don't know. But
okay,
what we
well,
do know is that
if
he
he
helped
did
Trump.
that, then he should
He,
be
he,
in
he
prison. But we're talking about
but
his actions as an attorney, and that is not what
so
he's
his
doing to try
actions
to
as an
cascade
attorney was to
this.
help Trump organize and um, bring together powers, specifically Pence's team, to try to stop the count of the election.
What he did was he consulted with the president and he presented the constitutional options available, probably told him, honestly, this is probably a long shot, but it's our only option. And then he talked to Pence's attorneys. Nowhere in there did he do what, help him figure out how to commit murder. And that's a ridiculous analogy. And I
I
really
don't
do
think
want you
so.
to answer the question. The question is, uh, let's say Jeffrey Dahmer's lawyer is arguing to keep certain pieces of evidence out of the courtroom, which they absolutely would do. Are you going to say that that guy is either a psycho or some other, pejorative, and not just this is how our system has to work and
Honestly,
operating within that?
he might both be a psycho and a lawyer.
That's
Why
not what
can't
I
those?
asked you. I asked you, are you going
No,
to
I just
assert
did.
that he
It could.
must be a psycho
It
like you did with Eastman?
No, because Eastman is in a completely different scenario. The analogy
Eastman,
of the analogy, the idea that these two things are even remotely connected, that I am acting as a defense lawyer for someone who has committed murder versus I am currently sitting with the president, drafting a strategy to undermine a legitimate election that
I
I
don't know
know
what
is
that means.
legitimate.
That is not what happened. What happened was the
Eastman
president.
knew he was a, 1 second. Last thing I want to say, Eastman knew he was a legitimate election. He knew the claims of fraud were bogus, and he anyhow helped Trump do this.
How do you know that Eastman knew the claims of fraud were bogus?
Because if this was in earlier this week's committee, where
But
they
he
have
said that he knew.
they don't have a testimony from him. He refuses
Well, then
to
how do you
testify
know what he thought in his mind?
because there is speakers to show to, I don't think it's beyond a reasonable doubt, but definitely the preponderance of the evidence that he knew and he was told and discussed, and it was clear that many people on Trump's legal team have told him, other than Giuliani and Eastman, were like, there's no fraud. Barr was telling him there's no fraud. They were consistently being told that there's no fraud and there was no evidence of fraud. So it leads us to believe that any reasonable, sensible person would recognize that. Right?
There was a time when I thought that there might have been some fraud, and I was being told by lots of people who seemed credible that there was no fraud, and I didn't know what to think about it. If you don't have testimony from him, and you don't have testimony from people who said that Eastman said that, yeah, I know obviously it's fraud, then I don't know how you're so confident. I mean, some people think the election was stolen. You can't just pretend like that's
I am
could
extremely
not
confident,
possibly have thought the election was
not
stolen.
beyond reasonable doubt, because that's not the metric I'm holding here. But I think that with the amount of evidence, it is clear that Eastman knew
No, it's
that
not. It's not even remotely clear.
it's clear that Eastman knew that the people around him and the majority of his peers were telling him that there was no fraud.
Obviously, but that doesn't mean that he thinks there was no fraud. That's
Yeah, but
what you're
I
assuming here.
can't play that mind reading game.
That's what you did when you said
how
that
could
he's
how
trying
could
to help Trump.
but you're asking
You said a second ago that he's trying to help Trump undermine an election he knew was fair, and I'm asking you, how
because
do you know
I
he knew it was fair?
I don't need absolute evidence. You're looking
And
for
now you're
out of
saying
his,
I'm not a
you're
mind
looking
reader.
for no, you're looking for out of his mouth specifically. And I'm saying
No,
I can't
you
do that.
said he
I'm not
knew
a
it was
mind
fair.
reader. But
You
I
said
don't
he knew
need
it was fair, and I'm
I
saying no,
don't
you don't.
listen to the words carefully. When I say I know, I'm not speaking to 100% certainty. When I say like if I ask you, oh, do you know that Jupiter is this side? I go, yeah. But like, do you really know? Have you measured Jupiter? No, fuck that shit. Okay. In the same way that I know, and it's clear, it's the evidence shows and it points in the direction with a lot of force that Eastman was aware that the claims of election fraud are not as crystal clear as he wants them to be. He's an educated man who's aware of how to look at evidence. So it's either he's an idiot, some psycho, some deranged man, or he's a bootlicker. I don't see how that's a problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to track this dialectic here, you're saying he's a bootlicker or a psychopath, and I'm saying no.
Not specifically. I'm being hyperbolic.
Okay, but you're saying he's either one terrible thing or he's another terrible thing. There's no plausible scenario where he did something legitimate within the context of the legal system. And I'm saying, no, he was acting as attorneys have to act. And then you said, no, because he knows this election wasn't stolen and he did this anyway. And I was just saying, well, we don't know that. He may actually still think that the election was stolen. You can't just say what was in his mind and impugn intent like that.
We spoke again that we're not doing beyond a reasonable doubt. Right, so
I didn't say it was beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, so you're saying that.
Why are you so sure? You're the one that.
I am so sure
knew it was in his mind.
I am so sure that he's because it's the only other option that's left. And when I say psycho, I mean deranged, mentally not there, unable to recognize falsehoods from reality. That's what I mean by psycho. So when I say psycho, that's what I mean.
There's a lot of people that think that the election was stolen. I don't think they're all deranged.
I think that they are unable to tell falsehoods from reality.
No,
if you think that the election was stolen, it's either you're ignorant, unable to tell falsehoods from reality, and by that metric, you are very deranged in your thinking. You cannot make sense of what is and what isn't.
Not that, but that's just really silly, right? Like there are a lot of.
Why is that silly?
Because there are a lot of very intelligent. This is like when the atheist says that all of the there's getting a lot of feedback right now on my end. I don't know if that's, but this is like when the atheist said that all theists are just kind of crazy and deranged and they don't know anything about how to parse evidence or whatever. It's like no, actually,
most theists don't. Most theists don't.
Well, leave that issue aside. Like actually, there are.
Why put that aside?
I said
most theists don't. Most theists don't know how to parse evidence.
It's hardly relevant. There are many that do, and there are many really intelligent theists who may or may not be wrong. But that doesn't mean that they're deranged. It doesn't mean that they can't tell fact from reality. Reasonable people disagree about a number of subjects, and you can't just castigate somebody who has an incorrect view as someone who is deranged. I mean, I think there are people that have very silly conspiracy theories about what happened with the moon landing, for example. I don't think they're stupid. I just think that they.
Did I say Eastman was stupid?
You said he was deranged.
Yeah, deranged is, and I explained what I meant by that, which unable to tell truths from falsehoods. If he really believes the election was stolen, he can't tell truth from falsehood.
But that's obviously not true. You mean he's wrong? That's what you're saying. If he thinks the election was stolen, he's wrong. That's what you think. You don't mean that he can't tell truths from falsehoods. He's just this like person that can't tell what's real or not. That seems to me what you're saying in order to say that he's deranged. That's obviously ridiculous.
In this circumstance, I think it's very deranged to believe that.
I think that people are wrong, but I can understand why some people might be misled by some facts that are out there floating around in the ether, especially if they're not putting a lot of time into researching this. That doesn't mean that they have some kind of.
But he's not they. Eastman isn't just they. Eastman isn't the total. I'm not talking about all of the Republicans, all of these people. We're talking about specific about Eastman, a man who sat in the White House.
Because you said
either deranged or doesn't care. Either deranged, doesn't care, or like a bootlicker, right? It's either he doesn't care about the nature of it. He doesn't care that his actions are going to have a specific result to them because he's hiding behind legal precedent or legal liabilities. Sure, he can hide behind that, or he's not able to recognize that he really believes that the election was stolen, that he's standing for democracy. That's pretty deranged. I'm going to 100% stand behind that. When evidence has been shown that Barr has spoken to him, other lawyers have spoken to him, consistently for weeks and weeks at a time, there has been no evidence shown. Consistently, they have been told that the evidence for the election being stolen is fraud and people are quitting around him, right? Or that he wants to keep playing in power. And a big piece of evidence to that is that On January 7th, he asked for a pardon.
Well, no, that's not a big piece of evidence for that. If
It's not?
you were, no, it's not, because if you
Why
had done
not?
something, well, I'm about to explain. If you had done something that was even remotely questionable, or even not even questionable, but if you had done something that you were worried that somebody might, you were, and I'm going to phrase this from my point of view, right? You were zealously advocating for a client, and you knew that after this had gone down, because the next day there was this big riot where people actually got shot and people invaded the Capitol. Now there's going to be investigation, and you're worried that your work as an attorney is going to be improperly impugned as some kind of collaborator. You know what would be best? You know what would be the safest option? Just get a pardon now from the current sitting president who's most likely to get you what. You would do that. You would try to obtain that for your own safety, one way or the other, whether or not you thought what you did was virtuous or not. This is about avoiding risk, about buying an insurance policy. This is the failure to, I mean, you have to think
This,
about
for
this
me,
from,
this is the thinking of a psychotic person. This is the thinking of a self-interested person who does not care. But all of this is me, what I think, what I want. That's just what I hear from that.
No. You said a second ago that it's good evidence that he knew he was some kind of devious.
Yeah, I think it
immoral
is.
actor.
You don't think. I think that if you think that I said that is good evidence to show that he's either deranged or psychotic, or like
And you don't
self-interested or bootlicker.
And you don't think it's just as plausible that he was worried about people like you not understanding what his job is as a lawyer and trying to call him a psychopath, so he tried to obtain.
I mean, I understand what people's job is. Listen, it's like saying I was a soldier, so I went down into the Vietnam village and I shot up like 16 kids. I was doing my job. I was doing my duties as a soldier.
No,
Why are you sighing at that?
Because we're talking about whether or not obtaining a pardon on the 7th is good evidence that he knew that what he was doing was wrong. And I'm saying
We're talking about the whole thing. We're talking about the whole thing.
Yeah,
right?
but we were
It's
talking
like,
about the pardon, and then you just diverted to like, oh, I shot a bunch of kids. Like we weren't talking
no,
about
because
that.
you're saying that people like me don't understand the scope within the job of what a lawyer does. And I respond with, I know what a lawyer does. I don't care that a lawyer is standing behind his legal protections, just as I don't care if a soldier stands behind his the orders from above. I don't care. That your job is to listen to your commanders. It doesn't mean that just because you now shot up a bunch of kids because that's what your orders was to do, that you do it. In the same way that if you're a lawyer and your job as a lawyer is to help your client and to help them in their legal capacity, if you helping them in their legal capacity is leading to this, and that, and you know that's the case, that's crazy. If you don't know that's the case, right? But everybody around you is telling you that, then you're unable to recognize what's going on. You are too invested in whatever is going on. So whatever is happening with Eastman is indicative of a man who is either not caring, he's self-engaged in his own he's engaged in his own he's furthering his own power and his own estate, or he just, that's kind of what I see from him. I don't see how that's not doesn't follow. I don't see how that doesn't follow at all.
Do you really think that it's a good analogy to compare something that is a war crime and an attorney filing a brief in federal court and having a conversation with a lawyer with just complete what is actually what they're supposed to? I mean, do you really think that that's
it wasn't always a war crime?
Effective analogy to compare.
It wasn't always a war crime. Yeah, I think it's a great analogy. It wasn't always a war crime.
So if you think that's a great analogy, then I mean, I really want you to tell me what you think of Jeffrey Dahmer's lawyers. Do you think that they're deranged?
I think Jeffrey Dahmer's lawyers are empathetic,
deranged, unethical, whatever.
No, first of all, remember, defending someone for doing something that's already done is different than helping them do something, right? And I'd like to see how you even see that, because Eastman wasn't just defending Trump; he was advising him on how to go about to do this.
He was advising him on his constitutional options.
On his constitutional options to stop and helping him organize and coordinate to stop to have Mike Pence do it. Not just advising him.
No. What what does that mean? Organize and coordinate. It's because honestly, it sounds like you think there was some plot to threaten his wife or something like that. Having a
No,
conversation with Mike Pence's attorney is not anathema. Like you're really like overplaying the
no, I'm not
agency that
overplaying.
Trump and his lawyer had over Mike Pence. That's why I was so keen on
You're,
drawing that
I'm
distinction. They have no agency over
what does
Mike
help or
Pence.
Greg, Dave, what does help organize mean? Help organize mean pull up my phone, call up Pence's attorneys, call up Pence's advisors, call up his chief of staff, be like, hey, listen, we have this idea. Right? That's what they're testifying that happened. That he called them with this idea of what they should do, and they're like, we're not doing this. This is insane.
And that was that.
So was he helping Trump or was he not helping Trump?
Conspiring to, exactly. What I'm saying is everything he did was within the proper purview of an attorney advising his client on his constitutional options. And what
That's within the purview. That's within the purview. And so what? So the fuck what?
Well, but this is because I'm pointing this out because you made the myopic claim that he could only be deranged or juvenile, and I'm pointing out that actually
Juvenile.
there are some. I'm sorry, deranged or deranged
In a hyperbolic sense, in a hyperbolic way.
The point of saying those two things over and over was to point out that there is no proper function. He was not in any way, he could not possibly have been acting as a proper agent of his client. And I think that's obviously wrong. He filed a brief, he presented an actual pre-existing constitutional theory, and he had a conversation with a lawyer where he was shot down, and you're acting like he's some co-conspirator in some plot to overthrow an election, which you assert he knows is true, but you don't actually know that. It's very implausible to me for you to be so confident
I think it's implausible, the things that you're bringing up. It's not even plausible. I find it probable from the way the evidence has been laid out and the evidence that we have that is the case. You are holding on.
What have I said that's implausible specifically?
That it's more. I think it's implausible that Eastman was just believing he was acting through his duties as a lawyer and doing what he's allowed to do, and just going about as I'm just doing my job as a lawyer. Blah blah blah. I found that very implausible. That's the mindset of Eastman.
That it's not plausible that Eastman, while he presented a constitutional option, filed a brief in federal court, and had a conversation with Mike Pence's attorney. You think it's
attorneys and chief of staff telling them that, hey, we should get Mike Pence shouldn't do this, and like we should have him stop certify the election.
You think it's implausible that he thought what he was doing was appropriate as his job as a lawyer for the president?
Yeah, I find that very implausible. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that your confidence there is way too high. I don't think there's anything he did that would even get him disbarred, quite frankly. I mean, all he did was give a constitutional option to his client.
Do you remember the first thing I said?
He gave a constitutional option to his client, right? He filed a federal brief on this constitutional option in court, and he had a conversation with the attorneys and staff around Mike Pence. That's it.
So do you remember how I start out by saying it's not about whether you can litigate against this. It's not about whether this is legally permissible or not. Do you remember that part?
I think you're harkening back to the legal and moral thing.
Yeah, because I am judging him morally. I am judging him as a person. I'm judging him as a person who's willing to go along with this.
And you can do that.
And for me, a person who's willing to go along with this, if they use that reasoning of I'm just acting within the purview of my legal, I am.
What do you do with
very
lawyer, right? Like there's.
I just explained the difference. I just explained the difference.
No, you didn't actually, because the point.
Yeah, I did. Jeffrey Dahmer's lawyer is defending for something that he's done. Well, I find that dirty, but I don't find it as morally reprehensible as what Eastman's doing. If Jeffrey Dahmer's lawyer was speaking with him, but hey, there is this idea where it's not really kidnapping, right? If you take this, it's not really kidnapping. Like legally, it's tenuous at best. You groom her and you invite her to your place, and she's 15, so it's not really kidnapping. If a lawyer did that, that's fucking horrific. That's what I think Eastman is culpable for.
Yeah, but you're really ignoring the point. I mean, it's really clear that you're desperately trying to ignore the point that I'm bringing up, and that is that you have to
It sounds to me
examine.
like you're not willing
You've
to
got to let me
recognize
finish the
morality.
sentence. When I'm saying when recognizing morality, it is imperative that you recognize the ethical dilemmas that arise in an adversarial legal system, and you have to look at an attorney who is doing something that you think is questionable on behalf of this, like Jeffrey Dahmer's attorney, or some other ethically dubious scenario. They come up all the time, right? And you have to be able to think about that in the context of an adversarial legal system where this is what we have to have lawyers doing. And you have to evaluate how a lawyer acts within that context. You can't just think about it as, I mean, you can
I'm
still
aware.
say that somebody, but you're not doing that. You're ignoring it. You said the only thing he could be doing is acting as a deranged or a psycho or some ethically crazy person. And you didn't want to
Yeah.
entertain the theory about how lawyers should act with their clients at all. You just wanted to say, obviously, he's a lunatic. And I think that that's
Because
the
I'm
logic
not going to
of how we look at it.
obfuscate about Eastman by talking about lawyer ethics. Because ethically in an adversarial system, that's how shit is done.
I'm
Whether
sorry,
that
but
is
if you're going to talk about a lawyer who provided a constitutional option, gave a brief, and had a conversation with another lawyer, and you
that's
want to
not
talk
all
about
he did. You
if
keep
you want to talk
downplaying
about
it. You downplay it every
what else
time,
did he
Dave.
do?
You're downplaying the fact that he consistently encouraged and helped the president do this. It's not just,
What does
oh,
that
let me
mean?
write a brief.
That's what
What
an
do you,
attorney does when he encourages and helps the president do this. He says, here's your options. Let me try with the federal judge. That's the best we can do. That's what his attorney does in his capacity as an attorney. And if you're going to evaluate the ethics of an attorney, you can't ignore the ethics of being an attorney. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You have to evaluate that dimension as well, and you're not doing that. Therefore, I say you're being myopic.
and I'm not going to put legal ethics as a way to obfuscate personal morality and personal ethics.
Well, then you're not.
I don't care. I don't. How this, Dave? I don't care. I really don't care if you're a soldier, if you're a lawyer, if you're a judge, if whatever it is, if whatever legal protection allows you to do immoral things is irrelevant to me.
Well, you're begging the question, though. The question is it immoral for an actor to, like an attorney in an adversarial system, to do things that might otherwise be dubious, to help a client who might be acting unethically?
To help a client overturn and certify a democratic election. Yes.
You are inserting a bunch of things into this, right? What
No,
he
I
did
am.
was he presented the president. What did he actually do? He presented the
president with a dubious constitutional option to stop the certification of an election, followed by helping him try to organize Mike Pence to stop that certification. That's what he did.
The federal government has the right to sue in court if they think that their interests were harmed by a state's illicit handling of a federal election. That is something that the Department of Justice absolutely has the right to do, that the president has the right to do. And if you're the civil attorney for the president and he thinks the election was stolen, it's your job to tell him what his avenues are for legal remedy. And you can't. I understand the evaluation, because there are two sides to the whole lawyer ethics thing about your duty to, like, general morality and your duty to your client. And I can understand your point of view that an attorney should do more than just merely advocate for his client. But what you are unwilling to do is examine the other dimension and say, there is this other side of things where attorneys are actually supposed to advocate for their client zealously and not think about anything else, because to do that would pollute the legal system, and it would make it so that people who appeared guilty but were nonetheless virtuous wouldn't have accurate legal protection. And you're not willing to have an adult conversation about both sides of the legal ethics argument. You just want to call them psychopaths. Therefore, I say
no. Again, if you're good, I'm going to clarify again that when I say psychopath, I don't actually mean psychopath. I mean a morally bankrupt person.
Whatever pejorative you want.
It's not a pejorative. Morally lacking. Self-interested. Not caring at the public at large. Whatever you want to say, Eastman takes these categories up top. It's
anything besides what an attorney is supposed to do when representing a civil client that thinks they have a grievance. Anything besides that. You don't want to talk about that. You don't want to talk about how
we can talk about you're not willing to talk about Eastman. You're willing to talk about lawyers and esoteric legal ethics, and we can have that conversation. But we're talking about Eastman and Eastman's behavior. You're only the same thing that you're criticizing me. The same thing that you're criticizing me, saying, "Oh, you're not willing to look at this dimension. You're not willing to stay in the dimension that the conversation is. Rather, you're trying to obfuscate that dimension by bringing in this legal one that is irrelevant to us judging Eastman's character."
We're talking about Eastman's actions on the day of January 6th with respect to how he interacted with the presidents of the United States. Those actions.
No, we're talking about his actions starting December 7th.
His entire relationship with Donald Trump on this issue was a relationship between an attorney and a client. If you're going to evaluate the actions taken in that setting, you have to think about the nuanced ethics of attorney-client relationships and how those differ from general ethics about general people and how lawyers have to do things like advocate for their clients. I'm focusing on Eastman as an attorney because Eastman was acting as an attorney. It's ridiculous to ignore that. It's totally sensible to focus on that because that's what he was doing the entire time.
Can I ask one question, Dave? Can a attorney choose to walk away? Like if do they have an obligation? I mean, they're not forced to represent them. They could walk away, right, and just say, I don't want to do this either way.
Of course, yeah. Attorneys can absolutely walk away, and I would not suggest that he was morally delinquent if he decided that he wanted to walk away. But I'm not going to call him morally delinquent for deciding that he wanted to advocate for his client either. Right?
I would. For staying in that, I would say 100%. For staying in that, I would absolutely morally impugn him.
You can do that, but you have to acknowledge that is actually what his job would have been as Trump's attorney at that time. And there's a whole argument about lawyer ethics that would suggest that that's exactly what he was supposed to do. And you don't want to, and I'm fine if you want to say, I don't agree with you don't agree with my assessment that he was acting as within his appropriate bounds as an attorney, and that he should have taken the other decision to just quit as Trump's attorney. I'm fine if you come down on that side of things. What I'm not fine with is this aggressive, very, very aggressive, ambitious claim that there's no case to be made at all that he was doing what an attorney should do on that day, even though everything he did was what an attorney would have done on that day.
He didn't do what a person should have done. He didn't do what a person should have done.
He did.
And he's a person before he's a person before he's an attorney. Just like I am a person before I'm a social worker. Just like I was when I worked in group homes, I was a person before I was a direct support professional.
You keep arguing that he should have made a different moral decision. But what I'm saying is there is a very clear case to be made that even Trump, thinking that he lost the election, has the right to counsel to tell him what he should do if he thought he lost the election.
Trump can have the right to counsel. Trump might have the right to counsel, but he doesn't have the right to counsel to Eastman.
Effective counsel is effective counsel is, hey, Mr. President, you think the election was stolen? There's not a lot we can do about it. If you think the election was stolen, what we can do is we can get a ruling from the federal court that says Mike Pence can open some investigation and halt the vote count. We're making up a conversation here right now, right? And we can try that, but it's probably not going to work. Is that what you want? That's your only option right now. That's what a lawyer would say to the president in that situation. I'm surprised that it's the longest shot in the world, but it's the only option that there is for a president who thinks the election was fraudulent. If Trump has the right to legal counsel to pursue his claim that the election was fraudulent, you can't also be asserting this claim that effective legal counsel is immoral. Like, you can't have it both ways. If you say he has the right to legal counsel, then you can't impugn his legal counsel.
I have to stop you here. Effective legal counsel isn't immoral. Effective legal counsel in this context, where John Eastman helped him and tried to coordinate this decertification with the vice president's team, is personally morally bankrupt. And the person who would
assessment that you are within
making of John Eastman's, whether it's in my right or not, is but we're not. Whether it's within my right, whether it's in the rights of legal counsel, is distracting from the point and obfuscating what we're really talking about, which is the type of person that stands by a man and continues this charade.
stands by a man and continues his charades. And then now it sounds like you're saying that there is no case to be made that Trump should have legal counsel in order to pursue his claim, his belief that the
No,
election
that's
was
not what I
stolen.
said. That's not what I said.
Well, answer this then. How could a lawyer actually represent his client, the president, right, who thinks the election was stolen, without telling him what his legal options are under the Constitution? All of them. I mean,
But that's not all he
what
did.
do you,
Stop. Okay, if you were a bodyguard, right? Your job is to be a bodyguard. Are you gonna go and be a bodyguard in your capacity for a drug deal?
is my job to be a bodyguard for a drug
Yeah, you're a
deal?
bodyguard, and you get hired, and it's like, oh, what are we gonna be doing today? Well, you're gonna be guarding me while I go and sell methamphetamines to like this 16-year-old.
Yeah, that happens all the time in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah, is that a good
The-
thing? Is that
No,
bodyguard morally
but that's the
reprehensible?
whole that's the whole distinction. This is the whole
That's a
distinction.
terrible analogy,
But
because
but look,
we have not set up a constitutional system to protect drug dealers like we have to protect litigants and give them effective rights to counsel. That's just, you keep coming up with these ridiculous analogies that
No, I'm
ignore
saying
the fact that we have a system constructed
it's
this
not
way.
about what is legal and not legal. That's what you're not getting.
But ethics,
Well,
legal ethics, has to do with how attorneys are supposed to act in the American judiciary, and you are not willing to interact with that.
Because it doesn't matter what legally is ethical or not. I don't care about the legality of it.
It absolutely does matter what's
we
legally ethical if you're acting as a lawyer in this system. Like, this is ridiculous.
yeah, I don't see how you can dispute what he just said right there, Dan. I'm gonna be honest. Like, I've listened to the whole thing. I agree that in any other context it would be immoral, but the lawyer thing changes the whole equation. Now, anybody else that was in the team that they're not lawyerly obligated to provide him a service, yeah, I would say that's
No lawyer is
illegal
legally obligated. No,
and
Zach.
immoral.
No lawyer is legally obligated to offer a service.
But he
Free association is a thing, and he chose to stay associated to the man.
Right, he chose to out of him being a lawyer, right? That's what lawyers do. They have to
No,
take
he
on
chose to out of personal. A lawyer doesn't legally is obligated to stay and associate with his client.
Okay. Well, what if I could put look? But what if I could?
willing to recognize that he is his lawyer? You're not willing to interact
Yeah,
with the
I mean,
nuances that introduces into ethics.
He
and
doesn't
ethical
have to stay his lawyer. He chose to stay his lawyer.
But
There is a
he was
different
his lawyer,
relationship
and
between
let's
lawyers.
deal with the facts of him being the lawyer, right? So he was the lawyer, and I see the distinction between legal and moral, but then, which is important. I think you would agree, Dan, that it was. Well, I don't even know if you would agree to this. Immoral, obviously, yet legal.
Yeah, of course it was legal.
Okay, so we have to make that distinction. And Dave is pointing out that when you're talking about morality, there is this one, and I do agree that this is a small kernel in a much larger context, as I stated earlier. And I don't see what this has to do with Trump or really at the end of the day. I mean, I sort of do. Obviously, it has something to do. But anyways, that changes the morality because, unfortunately, in this system, as we've discussed with Dahmer, there is a time for, I mean, this sort of is a morally corrupt thing, but it's there for a purpose, right? It's there for the murderer that is really innocent. It's a bad tasting yet necessary part of the system. Now, if you can't acknowledge that this lawyer thing changes the dynamics of the situation, the legality and the morality of the situation, I don't know. It depends on how much emphasis you put on morality pertaining to following the legal pathways, or the morality pertaining to the State of the Union. I don't know. So, and look, what if we could prove right now? What if we had a brain scanner and it could prove right now that he actually, he thought the election was stolen? Again, like Dave was talking about earlier. Look, man, people believe crazy stuff, right? And
yeah,
but you can't call them moral monsters for that, right? You just can't.
So this is why I said he either can't tell, he's unable to clearly tell the difference between falsehoods and non-falsehoods if he believes the election was stolen, at least in this regard, or
so he's wrong. You're saying he's wrong. That's all you're saying. He's
wrong. Or he's deranged in some way, or or he's so self-interested he doesn't care about anybody else, ergo psycho, or he's bootlicking Trump.
Or maybe he's mistaken and he's a lawyer who thinks what he's doing is meritorious. It's just like,
But wouldn't the mistaken be what he was saying? Wouldn't the mistaken be what Dandan was just saying, which would be not being able to distinguish reality from falsehood? Isn't that the same thing?
I take issue with him saying because Daniel keeps saying, well, he's deranged in the sense that he can't distinguish reality from falsehood. And I'm just saying, like, you don't mean that he's actually some person who's like cognitively deficient. You just think he's wrong
No, I
on this
never said
particular
that.
issue.
But I think this is right. But there's a difference between I'm wrong about the shape of the earth and I'm wrong on whether or not strawberries are technically a fruit or a vegetable or something. Right? These are two entirely different things. And to be so blatantly wrong, to be so wrong about an issue with no evidence behind it, which is clearly manufactured from all the evidence, from the testimonies of people who have spoken to Eastman, have told him, and the arguments they have put forward, to still think the election was stolen is very concerning about a person's ability to tell truth and falsehood in a serious way. It's not light. It's not like, oh, I was wrong, whoopsies.
Yeah, but the point is whether or not, I mean, it really plays dramatically into calculus in the Republic as well as the interests of his client. And it's definitely possible that he did. It's possible that he thought, a lot of people still thought the election was stolen on January 6th, which is why January 6th happened. The president did, Eastman says he did, or won't say he, I don't know exactly, I haven't heard him say anything, but a ton of people still do. Sousa has his film on it or whatever that I haven't seen. Like, people think things.
Yeah, 2,000
and
Mules, which is just the most discredited film out there at this point.
people think things and they might be wrong, but it doesn't, because you said deranged, and then you said, well, I just mean he can't distinguish fact from fiction, and then you said, well, I just mean about this one issue. So you say deranged, but you just mean incorrect, and I think that's an
no, I don't just mean incorrect. And again, I think to be incorrect pulls away the weight of the how, quote unquote, incorrect he is. This is not like, oh, I made a mistake on a math question. Oh, I was incorrect about what I saw. Oh, I didn't hear right. That's what incorrect means. He wasn't just incorrect. He was ignoring the opinions of experts. He was ignoring the testimonies of his colleagues and the things they were telling him. He was just ignoring those. It's not just incorrect.
I'm sorry, what date was the election?
November something.
Okay, November something. Okay, okay. So
he was ignoring Barr's, what Barr was telling Trump.
He might, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't believe it. And if he believes that,
and if he does believe, it's very concerning.
Like
it's very concerning.
And real quick, I want to say we got a Gregory calling in, Dan. If you want to bring
Dave,
up.
let me bring Dave up, and then we'll have Gregory. And Greg, you're gonna have to be our last talker for today. And we're probably gonna end in about 5 to 6 minutes, guys. Thank you, Dave. I really do appreciate. Come into the caller, Dave. Invited you to speak. So,
Dave was great. Dave, awesome stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the honest discussion.
Hey guys, I'm just gonna real quick. It was a great discussion, but I'm just saying this all began with Gore versus Bush, with the lawsuits. Gore saying first that he lost, and then turning around and then suing, saying no, he even though he won, the popular vote, he lost the Electoral College, and just because we're thinking, oh, well, look what happened at the Capitol. A lot of that stuff happened also in Florida. I don't know if you guys were old enough back then to see.
I remember.
They had, people breaking into buildings. The whole 9 yards. So this isn't just something new. And then if you look at what happened with Hillary Clinton when she was running against Obama, she just couldn't accept that she lost to him. And so she went out and tried to get the super delegates to change their votes for Obama, even though she before had her campaign fix it where the super delegates could not change their votes. So, there's just been a lot of things happening in our electoral system. In fact, when she lost to Trump, she actually sued a bunch of states trying to get them to overturn the Electoral College, saying that she won the popular vote. They should be able to, I mean, it's just kind of crazy, and it's just been kind of a progress that's happening, and I don't think it's over. I think this is going to continue for a long time to come from now on. Of people just challenging elections because, I mean, even heard Stacey Abrams after she's like, I shouldn't have said in Georgia, and then now she said she would never, admit defeat again. So I mean, there's just a lot of things that are happening in elections. Um, Trump
Yeah,
probably didn't.
100%. I'm from Georgia, and I can't stand Stacey Abrams, man, because everybody knows she lost that election fair and square, and she's just bullshitting. I
Yeah,
100% agree.
yeah, and so I think this is just going to be an ongoing thing, um, and Trump probably does believe he won, and I don't think he won, but I think he believed, and I think there was a lot of people who were attorneys who did believe he won because it was on TV everywhere. A bunch of attorneys saying, "Well, he could do this and he could do that." I mean, I know you're saying that these guys are immoral or bankrupt or whatever, but I mean, there was a lot of people. This wasn't just a
Yeah, but I'm
small.
not talking about anyone who believed. I'm talking specifically about Eastman.
Okay, I understand. I'm just saying that I think there is a lot of people out there who did believe it and tried to
I'm
do what
sure
they
there
could,
are.
so um, when you were talking about the thing with Dahmer, the one thing I would say is, he had public defenders, and public defenders, by law, have to stay on cases unless a judge will release them. So that is a little bit different in that sense. In general, I mean, a guy usually public defenders can't get off cases unless the judge thinks they're incompetent or there's some kind of big conflict. So I think there's a difference between a public defender versus Eastman. I mean, Eastman definitely made a decision that he believed, and he was going to try to, push it as far as he could in their direction. So you guys are both right in one sense, and hopefully everybody's just cool about it.
Yeah, I mean, Dave and I are cool. I'm cool with Dave. I have like no issues with him. I think we just our argument really is on which lens is the more appropriate one to view this issue through.
I say we, the American people, the whole system as a whole. But yeah, we need to be on the lookout for people who are using this narrative that elections are fraudulent, elections could be easily rigged. If they're claiming this, we need them to provide evidence because, I mean, it's not like an election's never been rigged, but all I'm saying is we got to stay tuned to this. We got to keep talking about this because in 2024, if this trend keeps going like you were talking about, then we're really getting into some scarier territory. And it was already pretty damn scary what happened, especially when you hear quotes of Donald Trump saying, "Oh, well, there's been violence before in America." You got someone like Tim Pool constantly putting videos about, "Oh, the Civil War in America." Yeah, man. I mean, it's something we need to worry about. It's something we all need to face soberly. Are there actually bad actors that are going to use this at an advantage? Once again, I'm in Georgia. We got a governor. He's Brian Kemp. He's a Republican. Like he's conservative as fuck. And then we got the conservative running against him. He was a former governor, Purdue, um, who is going, lock, stock, and barrel with the election was a fraud thing, right? He actually ended up losing, but even if you're a conservative, I would argue, which I have a lot of conservative leanings sometimes, I'm about moderate. I would argue many conservatives have an obligation and a duty to bat this stuff back if you see it unfit, as I do. And obviously, if you're on the left, you should just keep calling it out because obviously you won't agree with it. But yeah, that's all I got to say. We just need to stay tuned to what potentially could happen because this is a big deal, man. We're talking elections and democracy and everything that makes the United States a great country, right? So.
I'm sorry, Derek, but it's time for us to end the show. Jump into the Pangburn Discord for after discussions. I will be there in like 30 minutes or so. So again, thank you everyone. It's been awesome. I'll be here next week. I don't know what my topic will be, and so check the Discord. I'll make an announcement at the
Thanks,
time.
Dandan.
So
I appreciate the
of
conversation.
course, of course, Dave. Always heated conversations are good. They passion's important.
Indeed.
And indeed. So have a great night, everyone, and I'll see you all next week.